General Vagon has called the Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Welcome to the Lead Pursuit Podcast, a podcast covering Blood Red Skies, a game of World War II aerial combat. Welcome back to the Lead Pursuit Podcast. Tonight, if you have spent time in the Blood Red Skies Ready Room, you will already know our guest. Ken is one of those guys who is involved in the community, pushing us sometimes, dragging us kicking and screaming other times, but generally trying to help build a better Blood Red Skies community. Ken, it's great to have you on the show tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Doug. Very happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I can't say enough about what you've done with the Blood Red Skies Ready Room. For those of us that spend our time on Facebook interacting and working with that to give us a better idea of what everyone else is up to, what their hobby techniques are, what their gaming questions are, it's been an invaluable resource. So definitely thank you. Thank you for all the time and effort invested in that. And thank you for the patience as well, dealing with the same question for the 100th time.
Oh, yeah. That actually is probably the worst part of the whole thing, is that every now and then there's just that question keeps coming up. And it's...
Well, I always laugh because that's one of the problems of the Facebook platform is no matter how much stuff you put in frequently asked questions, and no matter how many times you put things in announcements, some people won't get the information or won't read the instructions, et cetera, et cetera. So it's always fun, at least on my end, to see when some of the same recurring questions come up and how we handle them and how the community goes, yes, we know, that's worded differently than we would have or something like that.
Yeah.
And see how people react to it. But, you know, that's one of the things that we've talked about a number of times on this program is that is also the value of the Ready Room, is that no one seems afraid to go in there and ask questions because nobody jumps on anyone about it. We may sigh and go, yes, we know that's not, that diagram isn't the most clear,
yeah.
or things like that. But in the Ready Room, you know, what have you seen with the community and how it deals with some of those issues?
I think the community in the Ready Room has been very, very tolerant and very, very helpful, and it's been a joy to basically manage a page like that in comparison to some of the others that I've been involved with over the time. It's I think it's a welcoming place, and that's good. I mean, we're all here to just play with our toy aeroplanes, you know?
Exactly. Well, I laugh because there's always heated discussions, and I've even referred to, on the podcast previously when you and I were talking about the interaction of turrets and cards and things like that, and trying to work with Andy to maybe close what at least some of us perceived as loopholes in the rules. But at least even when we have these kind of spirited discussions, I think, at least in my opinion, there's a feeling that the Blood Red Skies Ready Room is there really to make the game better and to make the community better. And some people will come on and vent, and that happens in any community like that. And I think it's good, but it's just funny to see that sometimes, thankfully less than I've seen in other community organizations, people just kind of get frustrated that people don't like their viewpoint on it, or they don't like their reading of the rules. But that's any community, I think.
Yeah, and we do have to recognise that Blood Red Skies does have some loopholes, and there are some rules that probably, with hindsight, could have been reworded differently. And we're still going to have that with Airstrike. There are some things in Airstrike that are going to cause problems. And while we're on Airstrike, I must apologise, especially to all our American listeners, because there is a blindingly horrible spelling mistake.
Don't worry. I laughed that. I think Andy even said it best. He's like, no matter what happens, you're still going to have them, and you're going to look at it and realize, how did I let that one get through?
Oh, well, this is one of those. I'm going to blame it on autocorrect. But, let's just say that we've misspelt Thatch Weave. We've misspelt his name. And it's just like, I was sat looking at it and, oh my God, we're dead. But partly because there's this attitude, you may have noticed it, in the UK, that it's our history. You Americans, leave our history alone, when we're talking about things like the Battle of Britain and
Exactly.
things like that. And then to go onto somebody else's patch and do that, it's...
Oh, well.
Yeah. But I'm going to say it's autocorrect, somebody's... That's exactly the problem. Yes.
Well, and
Move on.
we know we'll admit that there is a disconnect sometimes between what Andy sends and what Warlord lays out, and at some points you have to laugh about it and just realize it is what it is. Even though I hate that turn of the phrase, that we can always submit something that might be exactly what Andy wants, and then when it comes to the layout artist, you say, "How did you mess that up?" Because all you had to do was cut and paste, but. That's production. That happens.
The other classic, which I spotted, I still haven't got my copy. I've just got the proofs, the PDF proofs. Although
right.
apparently it's
my
in the
copy
post.
Has arrived. Mine is sitting in the United States. It's wonderful, but I'm not in the United States, so I know it's arrived. But
yeah, we've got
unfortunately.
We've got a brilliant diagram explaining firing arcs and things like that, which explains about. The Spitfire is in the rear arc of the Dornier 17, and we've used a Messerschmitt 109 as the silhouette for the Spitfire. Even though we have the Spitfire silhouette, everything's there, and we did spot it in the proofs. It just seems to have slipped. So, but I mean, this is rivet counting. It doesn't affect the value of the product in itself. I think actually that's a damn fine. Andy's done a good job on that.
From everything I've seen in the late production document that Andy and you were good enough to share with us on the podcast, it looked very good to me. I mean, we're always going to find those, but it is still hilarious to me, the things that get missed when they get missed. And sometimes you just have to roll your eyes and realize that's how it works.
Yeah, we're all human.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is good. But
speaking of,
it's one of the things on the Ready Room, going back to the tolerance and the opinions on the Ready Room. It's this certainty that everyone has, and I tend to think that actually the more you play the game, the more you realise that because of the parameters of the game, you have to accept that there's always going to be a problem. Like I say, there's parts of the rules that me and Andy, well, Andy always has the first, last, and every say, but we try to steer him in certain directions, and he usually does. He's a strange overlord, is Andy Chambers.
Well, I'll tell you, he's been wonderfully benevolent with any of the things I've brought to him, and I know at times I've had to kind of stand my ground and say, Andy, I know you don't think it's an issue, but I've answered the question at least 20 times in the Ready Room, which means Ken's answered it 40 times.
Yeah,
all I'm asking for is a simple diagram, Andy.
Yeah. And I think what we've got to recommend with Andy, I mean, I don't know him that well. I've met him, quite a few times now, and we regularly correspond through various electronic means. He is a professional games designer. And there's a couple of things in that you have to think through. He does understand much better than we do in general the implications of rule systems and game systems, and he's quite surprisingly good at it. So as a gamer, which is what the rest of us are rather than a games designer, we have different viewpoints on the way things work. He's very, very... He does like to say, that's the guillotine date, that's when it happens, it stops there, and if we have a problem, then we have a problem. That goes in the thing, and we'll deal with it later. And he very much doesn't like revision of stuff that's been published.
Which I laugh with him being from the Warhammer background. I'm like, oh my gosh, didn't it change editions every 5 years and then every 2 years? So I always tease Andy about that. I'm like, thank you for introducing me to the epic revision change via the versions of 40K, dumping my world on its head every few years.
I think his view on it is based on his experience, and it is just that if you constantly tinker with something, you never settle into a finite version, and that often, even though the changes may be sensible in some ways, the disruption that those changes cause. I mean, if we look at stats and things that we've done for aircraft over the last 2 years, I do think that, there are situations where we got them wrong. And I'd be, we must rush to correct this. And Andy will say, no, don't worry about it. Players will correct it themselves, or we can guide them into that. But we're just not going to be able to produce a new Mosquito card, a new Spitfire card, whichever it happens to be.
Right.
So you've just got to live with it. And, I have found that when he makes his little sort of rulings, when in our little groups when we're discussing it, when he makes his rulings, usually what happens is he's right.
Weird how that works out when you're the designer.
He knows what he's doing, sort of thing, and I've learned to trust it. Yeah, and the other thing that happens is that where he's not right, he will come round. He does listen, which
absolutely
is actually a very valuable trait to have. And he seems a thoroughly nice chap as well.
He is, and I always tease him for ruining so many years of my life with his various games that he's designed. So I'm always indebted in that, all the hours I've lost to his creations. But I think it's interesting as we talk about Blood Red Skies evolving and it being a fairly young, as a released game system, not necessarily young in all the years that Andy's put into designing, playtesting, fooling with the system before it went live as a published system. But it is one of those things that I think we all have to understand. It's balanced. It's balancing a couple different difficult audiences. I mean, when you deal with World War II, you're going to deal with rivet counters, grognards, and people who want a simulation. And it's not. We talk about it all the time as a beer and pretzels game. You know, it's a fun game. It's not a simulation. And I think that sometimes wears on a certain crowd. And likewise, as you've just started doing and hosting tournaments, the competitive crowd. I mean, there's people like me who couldn't give a fuck about competitive.
Or Roger's in exactly the same boat he has.
Exactly. It's the way I feel. And I'm like, I just couldn't care. I know people love competitive. In this genre, I couldn't care less. But, you know, it's a group that we have to satisfy as we go forward as a community and realize that we have to figure out how it works. And so I really wanted to talk a little bit about the last competition you just ran and things that you saw out there. I mean, overall, it sounds like a success. Nobody packed up their plastic airplanes and went home. Right?
Yeah, it was
frustrated.
It was a small tournament. We only had 8 players, so partly due to the actual venue and partly due to getting people to the location because it's a Sunday in the north of England. But it worked very well. We had a really good mix of squadrons, if we can use that phrase for them, and we had some really tight games. I think everybody enjoyed it. Certainly everybody seems to be up to doing it again when we can get another one organised.
Well, we always kind of grit our teeth and have said the dreaded M word, meta. What's the meta look like? I know previously we saw highly inexperienced but vast swarm numbers, kind of almost an X-Wing TIE Fighter style competitive list. What did you see that kind of struck you as either odd or was the meta shifting to something much more reasonable?
The shift seems to be, you're right, the swarm lists. We ran a similar event a year ago, and one of the lists that shocked the hell out of everyone was a Hurricane spawn. It was just pilot level 2 Hurricanes everywhere. Now I was flying. I was using martlets, Wildcats. And
for those of us on the other side of the pond,
we'll
loan them to you. Yes,
we did pay for them, I think you'll find. But and I played against that, and that was trouser filling. It was it was a game of whack-a-mole. I had better pilot skills. I could outmaneuver them all the time, but I could only outmaneuver one at a time. And once they were down, okay, obviously once you got them down to disadvantage, then it really was a case of just having to fly defensively and keep them down. It ended up as a draw. We both broke at the end on boom chits. This year, no swarms. There were a couple that were semi-swarms. One of the lads had brought some, I think it was Focke-Wulf 190s, which I still think is the best aircraft in the game so far. And he had a couple of reasonable pilots, and then the rest as rookies to keep the numbers up. At the other end of the scale, we had 4 Wildcats, all with aces. And neither of those actually worked, I thought. I thought the ones that the lists that seemed to work were the ones that were in the middle. There were 5 or 6 aircraft with a reasonable mix of pilot skills.
Right.
Yeah, it was interesting. And there was a lot of this metagaming going on with theatre cards and doctrine cards, which is part of the game.
That's what I was going to ask, is how did that shift work, where it became less about the airplanes, but it was about the unbeatable combination of theatre and doctrine and an airplane?
I don't think there was that. I get very sort of grumpy when people start talking about metas, because I think what happens with metas, especially in competition wargaming, is that the person who shouts the loudest about their wonderful concept tends to, and it's like, this always works, and it's, yes, but it only works because of the people that you're playing against.
Right.
Haven't brought something to deal with it, or that coincidentally deals with it in another way. So that 4 ace list, on first contact, people were stepping away from it and going, oh, I don't like the look of this. It's rolling an awful lot of dice, because there were Mother Hen, set them up, a couple of other supportive cards. So basically everybody was supporting each other, but what it actually meant was they were all flying around in this tight little ball in the middle of the table. And I didn't play against it myself, but I watched one of the other guys playing against it, Dan with his Spitfire 9s, and basically all that happened was a gap opened up. A Spitfire 9 got in there and just hammered one of the Wildcats. He didn't make his saves, and down he went. And at that point, the whole thing just fell apart.
Right.
So it's Met is I don't know. But I think that the way to go, I mean, you've got to bear in mind as well that we were talking about 500 points, which is quite restrictive.
Absolutely.
And I think that probably is a sensible thing for that style of tournament, if we're talking about 3 games in a session, an hour for a game. That would give us enough time to, well, it did give us enough time to play the games to a conclusion, pretty much.
Right.
And still get some shopping in and see the rest of the because it was a War Games convention. It's quite a good War Games convention. So we all got running around and did some shopping and actually got some refs and fed ourselves, and nobody died of exhaustion at the end of it, which was good. And I felt very massively superior as we were walking past on our way out to shop and go and get our lunch and what have you, past the other guys who we knew were going to be there until sort of it started at 9 in the morning. They were going to be there till 5 o'clock, and we'd started about 10:15, and we were finished by 2:30, including a break for lunch and all that sort of thing.
So all the Team Yankee and Check Your Six guys that are we're still yelling across the table at each other about the first turn.
Yeah. And it's Blood Red Skies is uniquely fitted to that sort of tournament. Well, maybe not uniquely, because obviously you've got X-Wing and things like that, but it does really play well in that setup. And yes, you're going to have people who are complaining about a particular card sequence. I mean, we had a lovely Chris Jarrett had brought his J2M Raidens, and he had tropical filters and tropical weather conditions, and everyone was a little bit sort of, but I thought, well, that's not only is that sort of thematically correct, it's quite an interesting sort of mix. And it worked. The one that if there are, I mean, this is a learning experience. I mean, the piece of equipment that caused the most sort of problem was drop tanks.
Right, right. I think we talked about that there's a point where you sit there and look at that and go, wow, is that gonna unbalance everything to the ahistorical level, which you're not going to get in a competition. It's not going to be exactly the way the aircraft were fielded, but you'll be like, I'm looking at all kinds of aircraft that didn't carry drop tanks, suddenly carrying them in this this setup.
Guilty as charged. My MiG-3s had them. Now, I do understand that the Soviets did have external tanks for sort of stretching the range on some of their aircraft. Whether that was MiG-3s or not, I don't really know.
Right.
But it was such a no-brainer, and I think that's something the tournament organisers probably need to address. The solution might simply be to say that you only take one piece of equipment.
Right.
And at that point, and there was one situation where the drop tanks would have been a disadvantage because of the reduction of your speed on turn one. Right. Could have lost an initiative situation. So.
Yeah, and there's a couple interesting combinations like that where there are aircraft in the game with exactly the same max speed, so it makes an interesting play out at the beginning. Or, as we've talked about with some of the theater and doctrine cards, it's different than some other games in the sense of those a lot of times really play against your opponent in the early phases. So all of a sudden, your enemy's theater cards have a huge impact that you may not have thought about. You may not have thought of every combination thereof. So, but that's what you have to deal with in a competition, and that's why I couldn't care less.
Yeah, I think I understand why people are wary about joining tournaments and competitions, but my response to that tends to be, well, the name at the front tells you what it is. We're not recreating the Battle of Britain or the Battle of Midway or what have you. And I think that there is a and Andy's pretty similar with this. I mean, Roger, as I said, just who does a lot of the historical work, and he's really the co-author of Blood Red Skies. To a greater or lesser extent, he doesn't like the idea of tournaments at all. But Andy's quite sort of reasonable about it, and you've got to recognise that the tournament play actually appeals to a player base, and people see it played at competitions and at tournaments. Will get into the game and then see the rest.
To succeed in the U.S. and in some locations overseas that I've seen as I've been traveling, you have to have the competitive side because that's just what they associate with miniatures wargaming. For right or for wrong, that's kind of what they think about. If it's not a bunch of dusty old men in somebody's basement with Napoleonics figures, that's what they think of as historical narrative play, and that everything else is competitive. So I totally understand where people come from on that, and it's as much as I may grit my teeth, I enjoy a little bit of competitive gaming, but I enjoy what I've always called light competitive, like playing the 500-point Zone Mortalis lists at Adepticon, where the game is quick, it's fun, you're drinking beer, and nobody cares because you're playing 3 or 6 games in one day, and everybody's going to lose some, everybody's going to win some, and we're all going to have a good time.
You are using phraseology there that means nothing to me. I am not a Games Workshop player and have never played 40k. I have never.
I'm so happy for you. You haven't wasted that much of your money in your life. And
I haven't played 40k. I haven't played the other one, wherever it's called, Warhammer, in any of its forms.
Build fantasy battles and
none of that.
What is your gaming background? So that is one of the things I've always glossed over and treated you like a Blood Red Skies only guy. Tell the podcast.
Oh, I'm history. I'm traditional historical. Gronyard, I suppose, rivet
dusty
coat.
grognards.
Well, no, I think it's an interesting point because of the development of the different styles of gaming on the other side of the pond is interesting. In the UK, we have a lot of gaming clubs, like local gaming clubs that have got their own sort of venues, and so our games are. This is before the friendly local gaming store concept came around. I was brought up to go to a war games club where we had 8 6x4 tables or something like that, and there'd be a different game on each table, and you'd arrange it in advance, and the games would last 3 hours because you had to pack up at the end of the evening, sort of thing. And then in the 90s, because I'm that old, I started to... I got involved with Fire and Fury's World War II set of rules, which are excellent, by the way, but they're not actually... It's difficult to describe them as Fire and Fury because of the Battlefront World War II. They're from the same team that did Fire and Fury. And I did some work with them just as on the British supplement, and it got to be a really interesting process. And that's what engaged me with the American way of playing, which at the time was, as you say, dusty old men in there refighting Gettysburg, you know?
Yeah, it really was. And it's fascinating because to me, I grew up with a very different, wargaming experience. In a sense, almost it was a precursor to the friendly local gaming store. In the 70s and early 80s, my parents had a bookstore, and that's where I was introduced to wargaming and role-playing gaming. And I remember there always being tables at the back of the bookstore that were always available for wargaming. And it was kind of funny because it seemed like the community, for some reason, got away from that and only, at least in the United States, only did that for role-playing games. If you wanted to play War at Sea, if you wanted to play Victory in the Pacific or any one of these board games, you were in somebody's basement with, a bunch of other guys, and it was just not, there wasn't a local scene to it. It was kind of people that all played war games. And then it seemed to me somewhere after the advent of Warhammer and Warhammer 40K in the US that gaming stores kind of came back, because all of us used to go, we'd buy our stuff at the hobby store, and there were no gaming tables there. There barely was even room for them to show you how to paint a model or a miniature or to do airbrushing. You bought your stuff, you took it home, and you sat in your dusty basement. And it was so it wasn't a community scene. So it was refreshing to me as game stores have really evolved back into this, where it feels like the community that is how I started. Because I just remember being this young kid that people took under their arm and said, okay, we'll show you how to play War at Sea, push these counters around, roll these dice. Yes, we sank your ships, now go away, kid. But that's how I grew up on gaming. So it's a lot of fun to do that again. And I know, at least in my local area in Beaufort, it's a very small, not necessarily very, very diverse gaming group. They tend to all kind of play the same games, but it's nice to have that ability to go to a game store and hang out.
Yeah, I mean, my local game store is excellent, but it's still dominated by GW. The percentage of GW to historical gaming goes up and down, but it's mostly dominated by GW. And, you have to live with that. I blame Andy Chambers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I always tease him about that. I'm like, you did ruin us with all the 40K and Epic and all those Battlefield Gothic, all those systems. But it was kind of refreshing to me to come out here to Asia, and I was in Singapore a few days ago, and to roll into the store, see that they had a large Warlord game section, and then gritting my teeth, knowing they were going to tell me that they only played 40K, to turn around and go, so you guys play some of these Warlord games here? And they go, oh yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
We have a few Blood Red Skies players, not many, but yeah, we'll play bolt action, and so it was nice to at least find somewhere that wasn't dominated by 40K, even though as I was there, people were pulling out their Warcry miniatures for Warhammer Skirmish and stuff like that. So
I think we're probably wandering into areas that the audience are not that interested in.
Exactly. They're like, oh, we don't care about
There's
people.
Two old men sat there telling, I remember when.
I remember the days.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes. And you tell the young people that nowadays and they won't believe you. No,
they don't believe how it started.
Yeah. But no, I mean, that was me from the outset. It was historical gaming at our local War Games Club. Went to university, historical gaming at the University War Games Club. Vaguely was aware of 40K and the like, but never really. When 40K was making its peak, I was busy doing other things. So...
Yeah, well, as you've heard me say, I got out of playing 40K longer than some people have played it. So I played it in the in the late 80s. Loved it, played it into the early 90s, walked away from it for probably nearly 18 years. And wargaming in general, I'll be honest, this has been an interesting thing for me to come back to wargaming, and in a sense to see where what I kind of felt was my hobby, how it has evolved and changed, and where those of us that were young kids have now become the dusty old men pushing our historical miniatures around the table, how it's changed. Well, one of the things we talked about with Blood Red Skies is that it's continuing to evolve. So started as a World War II very basic system, and then some jets were talked about, and some MiG Alley stuff was introduced, and some World War II jets have now started to show up. Where do you think, or I should say, how do you think that evolution has gone? Has it, in your mind, been fairly painless and everyone's been fairly accepting, or has it been a little bit of pulling hen's teeth and beating people with the aircraft cards to say, just play them, just try them?
I think on the whole it's been okay. The discussion around MiG Alley in Korea was interesting because going back to, I don't want to buff him up too much, but Andy's genius sort of move on the jet card, when he sort of popped this jet card at us, and we all said, well, don't know whether that works. Played it and suddenly realised that, well, actually, yes, it does work, and it changes the game. I think for a lot of World War II players, if you're used to Blood Red Skies and the World War II setting, where it can often turn into some horrible well, not horrible, but an intense furball in the middle of the table with everybody just bouncing on everything else. As soon as you start playing the jets and seeing just how different it plays, it's quite a step back. So I think that worked well. The big thing that I think is still a challenge is multi-engines and twins.
Absolutely.
It is where it is. And if you, just to go back a little, I got involved in Blood Red Skies just as it was starting to be mentioned publicly as a game set, and I wrote a little blog article and I hassled some people about it and contacted Andy, and I think that's how it worked. I ended up doing some playtesting, and then got involved with Roger and Andy on from there. And I set the ready room up straight away, like as soon as I saw it, because I thought this is going to be something that's going to be worth talking about. And the multi-engined aircraft rules always feel a little clunky to me. But the heavy fighter rules that we've got now in Airstrike have fixed most of the problems. You can still play, you can choose to play them either way. I'm still not 100% convinced that we're exactly in the sweet spot on things like Mosquitoes and P-38s. But we're getting there. Other than that,
we've played it both ways with P-38s, with Brett and I, and have tried out the heavy fighter rules as well as playing them as standard by-the-book multi-engines. And I don't know what the right answer is. I know heavy fighters feels better, but it still doesn't quite feel right to me. But I think part of that is I just need a lot more games playing it either way to understand, because I feel comfortable with multi-engine every time I fly bombers. That seems to make sense. There may be one or two ways that local gaming groups and house rules can tweak multi-engine to give it a little bit more flavor. But I think the addition of the heavy fighters rules helps people at least play something that's a little more cinematic to them and not feel like they're playing an aircraft that just can't fight as a fighter.
Yeah.
So I
think we had a problem with agile, the agile trait,
right?
And it went back to the initial concept of traits being card driven. And initially, when we playtested agile, we actually were thinking of playing the card,
right,
and it working at that spot.
Yeah. Right.
But that threw up so many issues as to, did it just affect that instance, or was it from that point on? And if that was the case, would you have the choice of playing it early or later? And the simplistic answer, the simple KISS, keep it simple, stupid answer was, it's always on.
Right.
and it does work for a given value of work, but it may not be what everybody wants. It will evolve, and I think one of Andy's sort of traits himself is that he doesn't want to constantly rewrite things. Where he has a system that he's comfortable with, he'll stick with it, and I think that that's probably a very good thing from a rules sort of developer stroke writer's point of view. We don't keep flip-flopping between one concept and the next.
Well, and it's the things that you have to grit your teeth and move on, because we've talked about it on the podcast. I think I even talked to Andy at one point about it. It's the concept of multi-engine and then of counting actual discrete engines. There's always going to be a variant or an airplane that runs afoul of what you're designing.
Sure.
And I always use the HE-177 that, sure, it is a 4-engined airplane. There are 4 actual engines on the airplane. However, there's only 2 engine pods.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody's ever seen a HE-177 run on 3 engines, have they?
Yeah, exactly. So I've laughed, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure if I shot up one of those engines, that entire pod is going to eat it. But it's one of those things. It's the rules you deal with, and in the Luftwaffe expansion, the 177 card is in there, and it's in there as a 4-engine, and so I don't know that many people have even played it to try it, but I think as we do some of the Stalingrad scenarios, we may have to see how that plays out as a 4-engine, or do we come back and go, okay, you're right, guys, this really should have been a twin-engine bomber, or attack aircraft, I should say. So,
well, I think that when we judge stats and things like that, it's useful to remember that this is a growing game and it's an evolving game, and that the path from that box set 2 years ago to where we are now with Airstrike and the various sort of expansions isn't something that has been laid down from the outset. In fact, there's been numerous occasions where everybody's looked and said, well, we don't know whether we're going to be able to continue with this game development.
Right.
And Warlord have been very, very positive about the game, and they've been excellent in a lot of the decisions that they've made, but they face restrictions as to what they can do. There was a point, I don't suppose it's not a secret, a couple of years ago, just after the first sets of plastics came out, not the soft plastics but the hard plastic, the Hurricane, Mosquito, where we were looking at a release schedule that was blank for a year, just because Warlord didn't have the capacity to fill those gaps. From my point of view, I was really keen to get the data cards out there, because the game had tied itself to data cards. Itself and trait cards itself were a thing that was brought in to sort of piggyback on the whole tournament scene and the X-Wing scene, and people thought that's the current thing, and so the rules were built with that concept in mind, and the first set was produced with that concept in mind, and then Warlord basically says, well, there's the Hurricanes, there's the Fokker Wolves, but we're not now going to be able to deliver what was actually supposed to be plastic P-38s and P-40s, I think. That's not going to happen now for another year at least. And there was a distinct sort of, well, how do we deal with that? And the solution was that we came up with was, well, if we can do the data cards as a pack, then frankly, Warlord's release schedule isn't so important.
Exactly.
Because the options are there to keep the game growing. Just to keep the game growing is the important thing. That's one of the things about the Ready Room, is we really just try to keep the game. It's such a crowded market space.
That is one of the huge problems right now. Is there's so many games out there, and so many different diverse ways to spend your gaming dollars or pounds or euros or whatever you have. Yeah, it is a problem. And as I was standing there in the game store in Singapore the other day, it was bad to me because I had this problem that there were games I hadn't seen. that I had only read about. I'd never seen them in the physical flesh of the miniature in that sense. And now I'm standing there in the game store holding them. That thankfully my suitcase was already full of clothes for the trip, because otherwise a bunch of those things might have jumped out and ended up in my shopping cart.
Absolutely, and this is the problem. So a game that was in Blood Red Sky's position, where we had the initial starter set and the 5 soft plastic squadron boxes, plus a couple of hard plastic squadron boxes, and then nothing for a year. It was not, well, who knows what would have happened, but the chances were it would have been forgotten.
Right.
Or there needs to be more to it. So we went with the cards. We sold the idea of that. I mean, initially we sat down and says, well, if we were to introduce a product that Warlord could sell, that would tide us over until we could get some releases through, what's the pluses and minuses of that? Well, down the line, it turns out that everybody's got all of the tight turn cards in the world. Now I can paper a wall with tight turn cards.
Pretty much. And I think I just got a bunch more with my next RAF expansion I bought again.
Absolutely. And there's some things that ended up in there that, with hindsight, maybe we got that wrong. The Spitfire 14, classic example, where we sort of went a little bit too far down the rabbit hole with Heavy Hitter. Where it should probably have just been tight turn, red climb, which is the way I have every intention of playing mine now that mine have arrived. But that was there. Those decisions were made based on the information that we had at the time, and then we'd started down the route. Warlord had agreed to produce them, and they were happy to produce them, and they're quite a nice product. They do sell. They look good.
I like them because it keeps interest in the game and gets people trying different aircraft without necessarily having more boxed kits, more overhead, more stock on the shelves. People can go, they can either proxy it with the aircraft they have if the variants are close enough, or they can go buy third-party miniatures, which I think in the big scheme is fine, because Warlord is not going to instantly go to the diversity of an aircraft model line like AIM has, where they're handcrafted from resin, poured every time you order something. So we'll see where it goes with the new direct sales. I think that will.
Well, that will be interesting. That's something that again is quite an interesting thing. Is that, and it actually is probably the reason that I got most interested in Blood Red Skies, was from the production questions.
Right.
It was clear that if you ever visited Warlord, they have an amazing resin section. It's run by a couple of ladies who basically are just incredibly gifted at producing resin models, but they produce them one at a time.
Right.
So, having said, well, we can't get, because the plastic tooling is expensive and takes an awful long time. Having said that, we'd like to have some models in something other than plastic. Can we do them in resin? And everybody expects that Warlord can, yes, we'll do them all in resin, because they do resin models. But when you actually see the production process, it is very much a craft process. It's
right.
A mold can last for 50 models, or a mold can last for 5 models. And then if that fails, you have to remake the mold.
Right.
Which is fine if you're selling bolt action tanks where somebody wants a single King Tiger or something like that. But the volume of stuff that you would need to do Blood Red Skies, a minimum of 6 aircraft in a box.
Exactly.
That's just not going to be viable. So they needed another solution, and that's where we got to the metal. I mean, Warlord, where everybody said it was, well, if we're going to spin cast things, it should be in resin because of the problems with the weight of the models. But Warlord couldn't, or weren't very comfortable with attempting it at the time, is my understanding. I mean, I'm sure they can speak for themselves. I should point out I'm totally independent of them, and the only information I get is by sort of creeping around the corridors every now and then, and
exactly.
But it's only my impression.
Asking the right questions at the pub.
Yeah, and my impression is that Warlord are very comfortable with metal, or were very comfortable with metal, and didn't have the skill set. They had a massive skill set and experience with metal.
Right.
So it was their go-to, was we're going to do it in metal. And everybody says, well, it's not great. There are issues, but if the choice is you can have the metal now, or you may or may not get the model at all in a year's time, then yeah, I'll take metal, thank you.
Yeah. Exactly.
And now they've cracked this resin situation. The resin releases. Just got a box of ME262s have arrived, and they're lovely models. And the comparison, it was interesting because I had some of the MiG-3s that in metal and then got the resin set, and the comparison between the two was a really interesting one to make. It's clear that, and I think you did point it out on one of the podcasts earlier, that the metal detail was sharper.
Right.
But I think with the 262s and what have you, they've taken that into account. So they've emphasised some of the details a little bit more. So we're getting much more panel lining and things like that. I think they've nailed it now. It's just a case of them transferring the production of the other models that are already out in metal into resin, and we'll be in a golden age. It's the sunlit uplands.
Well, speaking of the golden age and where Blood Red Skies keeps evolving to, Andy said the V word, and to quote a famous American movie, motherfucking Vietnam. So, what is your take on the future of jets? Vietnam? Yes, no, maybe, horrible idea, great idea. What do you think?
That's a leading question, that, Doug, and you know the answer is that we.
I know the answer, but I'm asking it anyway.
Okay. Yes, Vietnam is probably going to happen. Warlord. We made a pitch to Warlord to do something for Vietnam, and they've said, they're quite enthusiastic about it, actually. So we are going to try and get Vietnam to work. I'll digress a little bit into the dreaded case 1, 2, and 3, but we have 3 pitches. Pitch 1 is just a squadron set that is very similar to Megali. Case 2 is something more akin to Airstrike. And Case 3 is a full rewrite. Case 1 and 2, well, Case 1 is basically just going to be very limited changes, but hopefully we can do it in such a way as to make the game work. Case 2 would be something a lot more, and then Case 3 would be a whole rewrite. Case 1, we certainly, well, as you know, we're banging each other's heads against walls and things on Case 1 because there are some things that we don't agree with or that we're coming from. And I'll say now that having fighter pilots on the playtesting group is a nightmare. Because
dealing with those jet assholes anyway. I hate those guys. Oh, wait.
What do they know?
What do they know? Oh, they think they know everything, which we do.
Well, of course. I mean, digressing into the whole point about being a fighter pilot is you've got to be a totally self-confident jock anyway, because you're doing that thing is a dangerous thing that you guys do, and if you don't have faith in your ability and your equipment and your doctrine, then it's going to be a disaster. So I understand that. Sometimes I worry that we shift too far into historically this doesn't happen and that doesn't happen, and I'm going, but in the game it works.
That's always a consideration. I mean, as you're going from a trying to not be a simulation, trying to be a beer and pretzels game, but still get to that point where it feels right. The question, I always tell people, and you and I have talked about it, argued about it, yelled at each other about it, is what happens when everyone who's a product of Top Gun, Iron Eagle, whatever movies they've seen, what happens when none of that is really how it works? How do you compromise and make the game feel like fast jet combat, but not be so video game like or so arcade game like that it's not really a simulation of jet warfare?
Yeah, I think that there's a happy medium in there somewhere. I mean, as I've said before, if I wanted to be a fighter pilot, I'd have signed up. It'd have been you. But
be glad you didn't. You didn't miss anything. It was horrible, terrible, no fun at all.
I'm sure. Yeah. But you did get the cool sunglasses.
Exactly.
It's a game. The gamer wants to suspend disbelief and have an hour's worth of fun making jet noises and whoosh noises, and that's what we have to aim for. All these things are this sort of beer and pretzels to simulation curve is it is where it is, and you've got to pick a point somewhere along that. But if you want to be a fighter pilot, then you should really just sign up to be a fighter pilot, because that's the only way you'll experience it properly.
Give away hours of your time and go play Air War. Spend 6 hours to play 3 turns.
This is exactly the point. The joy of Blood Red Skies is just how dynamic the whole damn thing is. The lack of plotting, the lack of that whole record keeping and chart looking up and all of that. The genius of it.
The fun with at least with my local Beaufort, South Carolina gaming group was to get them to play Mig Alley and to realize that, wow, that was really different than the World War II phase of Blood Red Skies, and the fact that you're able to do things without this horrendous overhead of gaming thought that isn't a part of of flying. And they're like, well, this is great. I'm pushing jets around and making snap decisions. Oops, we just got shot down because that was a terrible decision. That whole fun of it. And when you played a quick game and somebody lost, who cares? That was 45 minutes, an hour. We still have plenty of time. Let's play it again. Let's do something different.
And I think that's the important thing that we need to keep in mind, is that there are other games that have done the micromanagement side of jet combat. And
people keep producing them. I
Yeah.
keep seeing them on various Facebook groups and then on the internet that people still are producing very detailed, grognard, rivet counting aviation games, and that's great. I'm glad people want an individual big data tracker for each airplane. I just lose my mind trying to do that.
Yeah, if I wanted to do that, I'd join the Air Force.
Exactly.
But yeah, and I think that the true sort of worth of Blood Red Skies is that sort of speed and dynamism of it. And if every time we introduce something that slows that process down, we detract from it and move ourselves closer and closer to becoming those other games.
So without giving away too much of what's being play tested in some of the proposed Vietnam rules, where are some of those compromises? Where are some of the things that you and I and some of the other play testers that we've sat there and gone round and round over issues where we just can't come to an impasse or can't come to an agreement because it really gets to that core of making it a fun game and not making it a simulation?
I think that the things that are really going to be sort of problems for people are where, and you and I think agree on this particular one, is missile counts. Counting individual hard points and things just isn't going to work. And realistically, the number of times you get into a missile firing situation are quite limited. So do we need to count missiles? And it was yourself that proposed not to, and I thought, well, actually, yeah, okay, I can go with that.
Thanks. Now I'll be reviled by the grognard community for being the one that
well, exactly.
That.
I've got 2 twin hard points on the sides of my Phantom that can carry my M9s, and that means I've got 4. Well, it does. But, do you fire them individually or singly? Well, it depends on circumstances, but probably in pairs. We have run ahead a little here. One of the things that I think is quite clear is that with the current architecture of Blood Red Skies, we can get to Vietnam and maybe early Arab-Israeli wars, but anything beyond that, we're really going to struggle, and we would have to go to a whole rewrite beyond that.
Which we know is not going to happen, at least at this stage. But I think for the players out there who are curious about it, there's definitely a possible road ahead for Vietnam. I think everyone just has to manage expectations that we're evolving a World War II gaming system here, and Andy has been very, very specific when we playtest things to say, this is my game. It's going to have my vision. So thank you for your good ideas. Go back to making an Andy Chambers game, not making a Doug or a Ken view of the world.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the way that Andy's he sat there in his little eyrie watching us, and he will swoop at some point in time, and he will be armed with a big red sort of felt tip marker, and he will be just drawing lines through lots of the things that we've done. But yeah, that's to be understood. And like I say, he is quite good at what he does, so it's always worth listening to him on those grounds.
Well, so let's talk about the other 700-pound gorilla with Vietnam, which is model size. Airplanes kept getting bigger and bigger as we transitioned from the Sabre into the F8, F4. Where do we think that's going to go?
Well, in some ways, I think it's a decision that's been made for us. It's going to be 1/200th scale. Now, that's because my belief is that Warlord, who are going to be the production side of this, are going to want to go to 200th scale, because their ethos is to produce models in that sort of scale. I know that there's always an outcry when Warlord do something in a non-traditional scale. So when they brought out Cruel Seas in 1/300th scale, when everybody else was playing in 1/600th scale, and when they brought out the Black Sails, the Napoleonics thing, in 700th scale, when everybody else is in 1200th scale. But the truth of the matter is that their reasoning is I'm sure that there is an element of commercialism in there, but they do fantastic models at that scale. I cannot wait to see an F4 in 1/200th scale. It will fit an advantage base, just
barely.
There will have to be a certain amount of careful calculation as to where the pivot point is going to be. And actually, I think the F105 is marginally longer, so that'll be even worse. But
I'm curious to see how it works out. I'm optimistic about it, knowing that even if they tweak the scale slightly to make everything work with the bases, my attitude is I want enough detail in the models that it makes it more than an exercise in painting them gray or camouflage.
Absolutely.
That there's enough detail for decals to be worthwhile. I mean, even though our last episode that that was about to get published with Kevin from Miscellaneous Miniatures, where we talked about cheating at 1/600th scale and putting in detail via fake panel lines. But it's one of those things. I think 1/200th is a really good scale on the table. I think we may just be hitting the upper ends of it, which we already hit with the B-29. You guys have seen the photos.
I've got 2 of those in order from Misk Mini, not Misk Minis, Amateur Miniature Dave's, and but the way I look at it is it's an investment. I'll get to use them in Korea, and I can use them in late war over Japan. So
exactly,
and I'm not buying one. I'm going to buy 2 just because. Because.
Yeah, I laughed when Brett basically fell off the wagon on that one, and so he bought both the metal one for our prototype and then the resin ones for actually to paint up. So I chuckled at that.
And I mean, it's. I'll be honest that if Andy ever intends to retire, it'll be when they produce the B-17. I think that if Warlord can get a B-17 model in resin out in the next year or so, I think.
At that point, Andy can high five all of us and say, "All right." Bloodred Skies has hit its point.
Well, I have 8 B-17s in plastic, and
Excellent.
It's a sight to be seen. It is fantastic. The only thing that's wrong with playing 4-engine bombs in that sort of scale is the advantage base system looks strange.
Right.
So I would strongly recommend if you ever do that, if you're going to put a box on the table, just put markers next to them to say that the advantage level is. But
we proxied ours, so we had mosquitoes flying around as our 4-engine bombers, so it didn't look too strange when we did it. But now that we've got the full B-29s, and don't mention B-17s to our guys, please. They'll start buying them, and I'll be there with Chris and Brett watching them paint them up.
At the time when I got mine, there were Academy mini kits that did a range of Giant of the Sky or something, and they were cheap as chips if you could find them, because they were all like out of production. They weren't the greatest kits, but they actually looked fine on the table. So I bought up every one. I got to the point where I was buying them up from eBay in Japan and things like this. Because we all get a little bit of sort of tunnel vision on these things. But yeah, they're lovely models, and I love getting them on the table. I'm not looking forward to getting the 262s into them, though. I think that's going to be shocking.
I'm going to let somebody else play me 262s. I mean, I love the airplane. It's always fascinated me for years. But late war in Blood Red Skies right now just doesn't interest me. There's so many other things I want to do before I get to 262s that it's been kind of funny. As they've released, I'm like, meh, whatever. Someone else can go buy a box of those and play them. I want to do early and mid-war stuff. So we'll see.
Well, I mean, the other problem with the 262 is that you buy the 262 box, there's 6 of them, and you buy the Ace, that's 7, and they're 75 points each, I think. So it's just,
I'm not going to feel that anytime soon.
Yeah. But if you're going to play in a tournament and it's a 500-point tournament, you ain't going to see 262s that often.
Yeah, exactly. Which is probably good. It's probably
but yeah. No, I mean, I think that the way that the tournament's seen can. Hopefully it will evolve. It shouldn't impact too much on the narrative historical players. We think that the tournament sort of setup should be okay, should work. We will always, because tournament players are particularly evil.
Unforgiving.
Yeah, there's always going to be the magic mix of cards and how you deal with that. But as long as the tournament organisers given enough flexibility, which from Warlord's point of view they always will be, because Warlord have been very clear that if you want to organise a tournament, then they'll support you as much as they can, but they won't insist that you do any particular thing.
Right.
That's good. Actually, this is a very, very valid point and an important point I should make. Warlord have been really quite reasonable and positive about third-party models and the things that we've done on the Ready Room, producing stuff that will allow people to play models that Warlord don't make.
Right.
Their approach to that has been refreshing. There's been other game systems that are based on historical game systems where it's, we'll deliberately restrict what's available.
Well, and I always think that's frustrating. You've heard me pontificate about it with the 40K scene, where I left 40K when it was a hobbyist war game and came back where it was a Games Workshop pure miniatures display, and that wasn't how I played the game. You had you made your force off of what you wanted, not what was sold to you from the company's line. So I think that's a great thing with Warlord, that they've realized they can't make every miniature out there, nor should they try. That really gives them a chance to concentrate on evolving the game system, growing the community, getting people who want to buy box sets that will make them a decent inroads into the game. But know that people are going to pick up some of their miniatures from other places. But you know what? You still need our data cards. So,
well, it's to me, it's been very good. Yeah, they've been very good about it, and I think that we should say that. I mean, it's easy to point at Warlord and some of their production issues, and everything that goes on. There are things that they get wrong, but certainly they're good people and their heart is in the right place.
Right.
And
we know it's always going to come down to the bottom line at some point.
Yeah.
Card decks cost money, and they have to be popular, and they have to be purchased. So you could put your 5 favorite airplanes in an expansion deck, and if they're only your 5 favorites, then
exactly,
going to buy the expansion deck. That doesn't achieve the purposes.
And I think that's something that people don't, from the gaming side, don't really realise.
Absolutely.
Everybody wants. I'll say it now. Everybody wants a pack of buffaloes. Will Warlord do a buffalo squadron?
Where you can stick your pack of buffaloes, gladiators, albacores.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are things that, I mean, that joke on the Ready Room about you can't have a buffalo. It was amazing. It was like, if we did this, just shout out to the community, which aircraft would you like us to stat up? Because we've got this, we have quite a long beta stat list that in deference to Warlord, we haven't produced the whole thing, because they may well want to do some of this stuff later, but they've been very reasonable and says, as long as you don't just publish every damn thing that's in the,
Right.
So it's like, well, what aircraft would the community like to see us get stats for? And Andy was confidently expecting it was the TA-152. And I was thinking the Tempest or something like that, but Buffaloes. And it was just like we were just like head in our hands, and the clown car.
Damn all of you and your Buffaloes.
Yeah, and it's just like, right, okay, we'll do Buffaloes. So we did Buffaloes. The stats are there, and that was really an interesting process from my point of view, because I did most of the stats with Roger, and we ran through. And when you read about the Buffalo, there's actually many different aircraft that we think of as the Buffalo.
Right.
And the Marine Buffalo is different to the US Navy Buffalo, is different to the Finnish Buffalo, is different to the RAF Buffalo, which is different to the KNIL Buffalo. And we have this situation when you're doing the stats. It's like, well, I can blurb on a blog and what have you and give you different variations for all of those. But if we're going to do a data card, it's got to be one data card that covers them all. So there's choices that get made when we do stat things up which are not ideal. So there is a Buffalo data card out there somewhere that's it's a merging of all of the various ones, but the Corsair Classic example.
Yep.
We have a data card for the Corsair where we effectively the F4U5, I believe it is. It's the last World War II production example. And it's a monster. It's big, bruising, very, very fast, very capable fighter, and it's perfectly usable in Korea as a wood mover and what have you.
As I've done that.
Yeah, it's not the Corsair that the Marines are flying in 1943.
Nope, not at all.
And yeah, we have that issue with. We have to sort of stick a pin at a certain point. And the tendency is to make it as good as possible. There's a similar situation with the Spitfire 14 where we gave it heavy hitter.
Right.
It got heavy hitter because it had 420mm cannons, but actually that version of Spitfire with the 420mm cannons never really saw service. With hindsight, we probably should have dialed that back a bit. The classic example was actually the ME-109G, where we put the G stats out onto the ready room. In effect, what we were doing was the G10, which is the souped up, polished version of the whole thing, and it is so much faster than the standard G. And when we looked at it, we thought, well, actually, that leaves us no room to do the 109K, which we did want to do, because the G10 is, to all intents and purposes, it's a K
at that point.
Yeah. So we dialed back to the standard. I think we used the G6 as the base for the G card that came out, and then in a moment of well, I don't know what you'd call it, but when we actually produced the model, or when Warlord produced the model, they were keen on making it a G10 so that they could match it with Hartmann. So we have a box of EBI 109Gs, which is started out as G6s, but the model is the G10. So yeah,
and that's the beauty of Blood Red Skies. We're not going to judge.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that is a beautiful model, by the way. That G10 that they've done is a gorgeous ME-109 model.
Yeah, I didn't order any of them. I think Brett ordered a box. I have been trying to keep my spending well in hand, but have not been so successful. So
yeah, well, I've had a disaster recently on the spending front because as I say, I've just ordered some B-29s,
that will kill the budget immediately.
Well, it doesn't help, and also all the airstrike stuff's starting to pile up, and
exactly,
it is where it is. But yeah, the whole. I think the direction that Blood Red Skies is going is a positive thing. We're going to get some new Korean war jets, Panther and the Shooting Star, I believe.
Right.
And yeah, they both add another dimension to the Korean game. And then hopefully the end of the year, if we can all agree, so I'm absolutely certain we will have Vietnam.
We will.
Yeah.
The question is how we'll get there and whose bloody body will be left by the side of the road.
Well, I don't really think that's necessarily the issue. I think the thing about Vietnam is that proof of concept. We're there. We've got proof
yeah.
of concept. It works. We're just talking about details, what gets put in and what gets left out. And
I think from my perspective, a lot of it is just it's getting the feel right, and we've gone round and round about playing through something enough times to make sure it feels right. It isn't just validating that the rules aren't broken, and that's kind of the tough part from my experience playtesting with Blood Red Skies and then other games previously was that it's fairly easy, unless you're Games Workshop, I guess, to get to the rules aren't broken phase. But then to get the feel right really just takes a lot of iterations and trying some different scenarios and going from everything from 2 fighters to 6 fighters to 8 fighters. What makes it still feel correct. So I think we're going in the right direction, and at least what I've told the community every time they've asked is, give us the time. We want to make sure that the product we tee up to Andy as the play testers is good enough that he can take it and tweak it and move it in the direction he wants to go, and have something that's fun but also isn't totally off the rails.
The biggest problem we face is trying to get a game that works with two planes aside.
Absolutely.
And also works with 12 planes aside.
And I'm not even sure McGalley really works 2 versus 2. I've played it that way a lot. It's fun. It's just I have every once in a while I've seen it where it's just over so quick, and I just kind of laugh and go, well, that's kind of how a quick visual engagement works.
It's
not a
that
World War II
situation.
turning fight.
Well, that's exactly it. It's that 2 versus 2 with McGalley can be over on turn 1.
Yeah,
and much as I don't think it's a great gaming experience, but it actually probably reflects quite a lot of the MiG sort of versus Saber combats that happen.
Yeah.
Just he comes out of nowhere. There's a quick burst of fire, and then one side's gone home, or spiraled in. It's going to be interesting, and I've played McGalley quite regularly with dozens of planes aside, and it's a much better game the more you scale it up. I don't know at what point it will be too much, but we certainly had 20, 24, 26 aircraft on the table at once and not suffered a problem. And it was a ground strike scenario when we did actually totally just load it out, and it was interesting. And it felt right.
I think I saw some of the photos from that where you had some of the aircraft out there, and that we'll scale some of our stuff up for Coastal Con here at the end of February in the States, and we've got my MiGs and Sabres with all the MiGs and the B-29s that Brett has. So we'll see how that works as we scale it up from 6v6, which is what we usually have been playing. But my experience is it will be fine. You'll just allot a little bit more time, but as long as everyone's a skilled player, it shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah. So I suppose back to the Ready Room and where we started from. The joy of the Ready Room from my point of view is, and I think from Andy's point of view, because he doesn't have to do it, is that because it's not my job, I have other things that happen. I'm not invested in financially in the success of the Ready Room one way or another.
Exactly.
It does allow us to be independent, and that's quite important. And I know it upsets some people sometimes, and we can criticise Warlord when it's due, and people can be reasonable about it. And it's if Warlord are going to compete, their aim is going to be we're going to be the best producers of miniature wargaming around there.
Right.
And that's the way to compete, to compete on quality rather than to try and restrict. I think that Warlord are very good at that. They may not be the best quality. It's safe to say that there are problems with some of the metal models, and everybody knows that. That it's not the best material for the circumstances that we've got. And I know Dave over at Armaments in Miniature is I don't know his sales have gone through the roof. To the point where he can't actually get new models out because he's constantly churning out the ones that people are requesting.
Oh yeah,
and
if people want to know, there's sometimes a 3 or 4 week wait if you've never ordered from AIM. And this last series of playtest models, he's like, "I'm sorry, I can't get them out in 3 weeks." And I said, "That's fine. I'm in Asia, so take your time. I won't be using them."
I've got nothing but good things to say about AIM. They've been fantastic.
They're awesome. Dave runs a great operation.
Yeah, and it's people. Actually, it's this thing that there's a generation of gamers now who don't seem to understand that we have this. You can have this situation where you can have third-party models involved in the game.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of standoff. Is that legitimate? Well, actually, yeah. Why not?
Actually, that's how we've designed it.
Yeah. And Warlord, I mean, I'm sure Warlord would very much like to produce, well, I'm absolutely certain Warlord would very much like to produce a range as big as AIM has.
Right.
And one day they may well do so, but it's going to take a while getting there. So
Absolutely.
Up to that point, they'd far rather that you bought aircraft and played the game from somewhere else and keep
Right.
the game growing than artificially restrict the game. And that's an enlightened and positive position to have. But yeah, from the Ready Room's point of view, we'll always try and encourage people to play. Although I can get a little bit annoyed with some of the proposals. I think that often there's a thing in wargaming where you take something that you consider to be a beer and pretzels game and add layers to it, add extra detail to it that with hindsight probably isn't needed.
Right.
And that's just a natural thing with gamers. I think that we can improve on this. And sometimes I just think, well, you could just actually play the game a little bit more and see the nuances in there, because there are a lot.
That's the difficulty, but the nice thing about compressed stat lines is we know
Yes.
there's things that aren't super detailed, and we could make them more detailed, but then it wouldn't be Blood Red Skies. It wouldn't play quickly. And in my mind, it wouldn't be the game that I'm looking to play, which is something that's not super complex with a lot of record keeping and things like that. But
How
we've
do
been
you
talking
feel
for about an hour and 15,
God, yes.
so before we bore the rest of the podcast team with our reminiscences as old guys,
Yeah.
are there any other things you wanted to cover, you want to talk about, either for the Ready Room or where, at least in your opinion, Blood Red Skies is going, things people need to know before we wrap things up?
I think that the director, Andy's in charge, and he's got lots of projects on, so he's going to be drawn in different directions. He's not going to be sat every hour God gives writing Blood Red Skies.
Exactly.
However, it is his private project. This is his baby. It's unlike a lot of other projects that you know, somebody's come to him and said, Andy Chambers, internationally renowned games designer, design me a game that does this. In this particular instance, this is one where he's gone to Warlord and said, I've got this game. And it's been a little pet project of his for quite a long time. So he's committed to it in ways that I don't think it's necessarily the case with other systems. I mean, not necessarily saying that he's going to walk away from other systems or anything like that. But Blood Red Skies is here to stay. Will it go to World War One? Yes.
No,
it won't.
Don't do it.
Well, we had a discussion about it, and the big stumbling block was the models. It is a major issue to get a World War One squadron level dogfighting game with enough models. They probably will need to be in plastic. They're probably going to need to be self-assemble, and that's quite a big sort of step, and a massive outlay in costs, which I don't think we're in a position to consider at the moment. Well, when I say we, the powers that be, I certainly am. I'm not putting my house on the remortgaging my house to justify it.
Exactly.
and that's probably what it will need if we go in there. But I think at some point in time, 5 years down the line, there'll be the Blood Red Baron Red Skies or something.
If I wanted lines and rigging and cloth, I would be playing Black Seas. Don't bring it into my air battles.
Yeah, well, I think that was something that put me off Black Seas. When people are just rigging these, and the models are gorgeous. And
they're thinking, beautiful. And I look at them and go, no, thank you.
Yeah, life is too short. I
don't want to do that with airplanes.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with my model aircraft at the moment, is the first thing that I do is take off all the extraneous bits.
Yeah.
Because there's quite a few models where you're going to just have scattered bits of debris on your gaming table, sort of. Particularly as Blood Red Skies is very tactile. You do move the planes around a lot. You touch the models a lot. The tilting of the bases is, if the models aren't solid, then you are going to scatter component parts all the way across your gaming table. So yeah, I must admit, I got some of the trumpeter models for Wildcats and stuff like that, and the first thing that happened was bits snapping off left, right, and centre. Back to the drawing board on that. So yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, we won't. That'll be a while off World War One, but I think it'll happen. I'm fairly certain that if we can deliver on Vietnam, we will get Arab-Israeli wars as well, just to keep Roger quiet as much as anything. That and the fact that how anybody can not love the idea of a Mirage 3.
Exactly.
It's iconic. It's a gorgeous aeroplane, and
there is no way you can still poke your opponent in the eye with it. So.
Yeah, it's the ultimate sort of gaming sort of dart, isn't it?
Exactly, it is.
But beyond that, it isn't. It would have to be a total rewrite. Well, yeah, we've got that under control. The Second World War stuff. How far that's going to go? Well, we know the release schedule for 2020 so far. Sadly, no French and no Italians, which I think is unfortunate, but Warlord just don't have the capacity.
Right. So,
yeah, that's a shame. But I'm sure we can get some cards out there. I mean, you guys have done the Italians from Lead Pursuit, which I think is excellent. And yeah, I'm sure we can do something like that, and the support will be there from Andy to do that. He's not going to sort of leap up and down and say no, you can't do that.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing, is that I want to thank you and Andy both for being so accommodating for these three Americans showing up and saying we want to be part of the community, and we want to help you guys field some of the information. We want to help you play test. We want to help you grow the community in what is arguably an exciting game, an exciting genre, but sometimes, as it is with smaller manufacturers, you don't have the immediate outlay into every part of the market. So you guys have been great in letting us get the word out, and I've enjoyed so far traveling around the world a little bit and playing some Blood Red Skies. So the thing that we'd like to throw out to all the listeners is, listen to the episode, give us your feedback, specifically in the Ready Room, where you can poke Ken and I both in the eye personally, say that we're totally off base, but also over on the Lead Pursuit Facebook page, on our Instagram page, or over on our website. You can leave us comments there.
It's been great chatting to you, Doug. But yeah, anytime, yeah.